Montana Territory, 1872. The Bitterroot Valley lay sprawled beneath a heavy sky, its untamed beauty a striking contrast to the desperate solitude that had become Matthew Flynn's constant companion. At 25, Matthew had already seen enough of the frontier's cruelties to convince him that the West was no place for tenderness. The scars on his calloused hands told stories of cattle drives and barbed wire. But it was the invisible wounds that shaped him most. The belief that a man survived these wild lands alone or not at all. Attachment gets a man killed out here, he'd told his foreman just last week, squinting against the harsh sun as they mended a broken fence line. A cowboy's only loyalty should be to his horse and his gun. Matthew stood 6 feet tall with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work. His face, handsome despite the weather-worn quality of someone who lived under Montana skies, rarely showed the smile that had once come easily. He kept his light brown hair short and his jawline, though usually displaying a day's worth of stubble by evening, clean-shaven each morning, one of the few civilized habits he maintained. What he wanted, what he told himself he wanted, was simply to make his small ranch profitable enough to ensure his survival without depending on anyone else. Yet in the quiet evenings, when the bunkhouse chatter faded and he sat alone on his cabin porch, Matthew occasionally allowed himself to acknowledge what he truly needed. Someone to share the crushing weight of frontier solitude. Someone to make his hardscrabble existence feel like more than just survival. These thoughts he quickly buried, considering them dangerous indulgences for a man determined to keep his heart as fortified as his property lines. That spring morning began like any other, with Matthew tallying supplies in the barn when the distant sound of wheels caught his attention. Visitors were rare, especially this early in the season when the mountain passes were barely clear of snow. He stepped outside, hand instinctively resting on his holstered Colt. The wagon approached slowly, its single occupant, a woman, handling the reins with surprising confidence. As she drew closer, Matthew felt an unwelcome jolt of recognition. The sunlight caught her honey-blonde hair, swept up beneath a modest bonnet that framed delicate features and determined blue eyes. Victoria Taylor, he breathed, the name falling from his lips like a prayer he'd forgotten. At 20 years old, Victoria looked both familiar and strange to him. The girl he'd known in Missouri before the war now transformed into a woman. Her simple blue dress couldn't hide the elegant way she carried herself, though the journey had clearly taken its toll. There was a weariness around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and something else, a resolve that seemed at odds with the proper young lady he remembered. "Matthew Flynn," she called, bringing the wagon to a halt. "I was beginning to think I had the wrong directions." He approached cautiously. "You're a long way from Missouri, Miss Taylor." "It's Mrs. Bennett now." She held up a gloved hand. Or it was. "I'm a widow." The revelation hit Matthew with unexpected force. Before he could respond, Victoria continued, "I've come about your advertisement." "For a schoolteacher?" She produced a folded newspaper clipping. "You wrote that Elk Creek settlement needed someone to educate the children." Matthew stared at her blankly. The settlement committee had placed that advertisement months ago, never expecting a response before summer, if at all. "You came all this way to teach." Victoria's chin lifted slightly. "I came to start over, Mr. Flynn. Teaching is merely how I plan to support myself while doing so." As Matthew helped her down from the wagon, their hands briefly connected, and in that moment, everything he thought he understood about his carefully constructed isolation began to crack. The woman whose letters he'd once waited for during the war, whose correspondence had abruptly stopped, had somehow found her way to his doorstep, bringing with her memories of a time when he believed in things beyond mere survival. 2 days later, the settlement council gathered in the Mercantile to meet Victoria. Matthew had reluctantly offered her lodging at his ranch until proper accommodations could be arranged, a small cabin previously used for storage that stood a respectable distance from his own house. The arrangement was temporary, he'd assured himself and the council members who raised eyebrows at the propriety. "Mrs. Bennett comes highly recommended," Matthew explained to the gathered men, though he knew nothing of her qualifications beyond the papers she'd shown him. "She taught in St. Louis after the war." Victoria stood before them, composed despite the scrutiny. "I believe education is the foundation of civilization, gentlemen. Even, perhaps especially, on the frontier." Later, as they rode back to the ranch, Matthew broke their uncomfortable silence. You never said why you stopped writing. Victoria kept her eyes forward. You never answered my last 3 letters. Matthew's hands tightened on the reins. I answered every letter I received. The implication hung between them like storm clouds, letters lost, or perhaps never sent, but neither pursued it further. That night, Victoria found herself unable to sleep in the small cabin Matthew had hastily prepared. She unpacked the wooden box that contained her most precious possessions, a packet of letters tied with faded ribbon, all returned unopened after she'd married Thomas Bennett. She'd kept them as a reminder of youthful foolishness, yet couldn't bring herself to burn them. A knock at the door startled her. Matthew stood outside with extra blankets. Nights get cold here through June, he explained, then noticed the letters. Something flickered across his face, recognition, pain, confusion. Victoria quickly gathered them. Old correspondence. Nothing important. We should talk about what happened, Victoria. It was years ago. We were different people. Matthew nodded stiffly. I just want you to know. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. The settlement needs a teacher. Your past, our past, doesn't matter here. But as he walked away into the darkness, they both knew it was a lie. The schoolhouse was little more than an abandoned storage building behind the mercantile, but within 2 weeks, Victoria had transformed it. Fresh whitewash brightened the walls, crude benches and tables arranged in neat rows, and a small chalkboard mounted at the front. Word spread quickly that Elk Creek settlement finally had a teacher, and families from outlying homesteads began making arrangements for their children. Matthew watched from a distance as Victoria established herself in the community. He told himself his frequent trips to town were necessary for ranch business, but found himself lingering to observe her quiet determination. Something about seeing her standing before the schoolhouse, her honey blonde hair catching the sunlight, stirred memories he'd long suppressed. One evening, he arrived at the schoolhouse to find Victoria struggling with a broken window shutter. Let me, he offered, taking the hammer from her hands. Their fingers brushed, and Victoria pulled away too quickly. Thank you. She stepped back, maintaining a careful distance. I've been meaning to repair it before the next storm. As Matthew worked, Victoria gathered her teaching materials. I've noticed Josiah Miller has difficulty seeing the board, she remarked. His family can't afford spectacles. The Millers lost their crop last year, barely made it through winter. Perhaps the community could help. Matthew turned to her. People here are just surviving, Victoria. There's not much charity to spare. Yet they found resources for a school. Children need learning, even out here. Victoria's expression softened. I didn't expect that from you. What? That you'd value education. You always talked about heading west to escape books and learning. The memory of their youthful conversations hit him unexpectedly. People change, do they? Her blue eyes studied him. The Matthew I knew had dreams beyond survival. He finished with the shutter, avoiding her gaze. Dreams don't feed you when winter comes. As June bloomed across the valley, the tension between them settled into a cautious routine. Victoria taught during the days while Matthew managed his ranch, their paths crossing just enough to maintain polite distance. But with each encounter, questions lingered beneath their careful conversation, about letters never received, promises unfulfilled, and the years that had shaped them into strangers. The situation changed during the summer social organized by the settlement women. The gathering behind the church brought together families from miles around, a rare opportunity for isolated homesteaders to connect. Tables groaned with potluck offerings, and someone had brought a fiddle. Matthew hadn't planned to attend, but found himself drawn by the sound of music drifting across the settlement. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as Victoria helped organize games for the children. She's a natural with the little ones, said Margaret Holden, the blacksmith's wife, appearing beside him. Shame, she lost her own. Matthew turned sharply. What? Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Oh dear, I assumed you knew. Being that you're providing her lodging. Knew what? Mrs. Bennett was with child when her husband died of influenza last winter. Lost the baby shortly after. Margaret lowered her voice. That's why she came west, from what I gather. Too many ghosts back east. The revelation struck Matthew like a physical blow. He watched Victoria with new understanding, the sadness he occasionally glimpsed in her eyes, her determination to build something new, the careful way she held herself apart from others' sympathy. Later, as twilight softened the day's heat and couples began dancing to the fiddle's tune, Matthew found himself approaching Victoria. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Bennett?" Surprise registered on her face. "I didn't think cowboys danced." "Some do. Poorly, but enthusiastically." A smile, the first genuine one he'd seen, brightened her features. "In that case, how could I refuse?" As they joined the dancers, Matthew was acutely aware of the community's curious glances. Victoria moved with the natural grace he remembered, though he noted how she maintained a proper distance between them. "I heard about your loss," he said quietly. Her steps faltered momentarily. "The settlement grapevine is efficient." "I'm sorry, Victoria." "It was God's will," she replied automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. "Was it God's will that brought you here? To my doorstep of all places?" The music slowed, and Victoria looked up at him. "The advertisement had the settlement name. I didn't know it was your land until I arrived." "Would you have come if you'd known?" Her honesty surprised them both. "No." As July's heat settled over the valley, Victoria established a routine that carefully orbited around Matthew's. She rode to town each morning before he emerged from his cabin and returned after he typically finished evening chores. The small cabin became her sanctuary, though she couldn't help noticing Matthew's solitary figure on his porch some evenings, staring toward the mountains as though seeking answers in their ancient slopes. One scorching afternoon, Victoria dismissed her students early when the schoolhouse became unbearably hot. Returning to the ranch, she found Matthew's horse gone and the ranch hands busy in the distant pastures. The oppressive heat drove her toward the creek that ran behind the property, where cottonwoods offered blessed shade. She followed the path until she found a secluded pool deep enough for wading. After ensuring her privacy, Victoria removed her shoes and stockings, lifting her skirts just enough to step into the cool water. The relief was immediate and welcome. She closed her eyes, allowing the gentle current to soothe her aching feet. "Careful there. Current's stronger than it looks after the melt." Victoria startled, nearly losing her balance. Matthew stood on the bank, hat in hand, clearly having just emerged from swimming himself. His shirt clung to his damp skin, hair darkened by water. "I didn't. I thought you were in town," she stammered, suddenly conscious of her bare ankles exposed to view. "Finished early." His eyes remained respectfully on her face. "Creek's the only relief on days like this." Victoria nodded, uncertain whether to retreat or continue her respite under his watchful eye. "It's unseemly, I know. Nothing unseemly about cooling off. No one's around for miles except my hands, and they're occupied with the south herd." He hesitated. "I can go." "No," she said, surprising herself. "It's your land." Matthew settled on a rock, keeping a proper distance. "Been meaning to ask how you're finding the teaching." The children are eager learners, despite their circumstances. Some ride for hours to attend. Frontier families value what's rare. Education's hard to come by out here. Victoria studied him. "You speak as though you're not one of them. Aren't we both outsiders in some ways?" The observation hung between them, unexpectedly perceptive. Victoria waded a few steps further, the water swirling around her calves. "I found some of your books in the storage trunk," she said. "Poetry. Shakespeare. Not typical cowboy reading." A flush colored his neck. "Remnants from another life. The life where you wrote letters filled with Tennyson quotes." His eyes met hers, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. "You remember those?" "I kept them." The admission escaped before she could reconsider. "Even after everything." Matthew stood, approaching the creek's edge. "Victoria, what happened? One day your letters came regularly, then nothing. Months later I heard you'd married." The pain in his voice stripped away years of practiced detachment. "I wrote to you every week. When no answers came, my father showed me the newspaper article about you heading west with a woman, a bride," it claimed. She looked down at the rippling water. "I thought you'd found someone else." "There was never." Matthew shook his head in disbelief. "I went west with my cousin and his wife after the war. There was never anyone else." Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet, years of misunderstandings suddenly exposed. Before she could respond, thunder rolled across the valley, and the sky darkened with alarming speed. "Storm's coming," Matthew warned, extending his hand. These mountain squalls hit hard and fast. As Victoria reached for him, the first heavy raindrops fell. Their fingers had barely touched when lightning cracked nearby, startling her. She slipped on the creek's smooth stones, falling forward into the deepening water. The current, strengthened by recent mountain snowmelt, caught her immediately. Victoria gasped as the cold water soaked her dress, the sudden weight dragging her downstream. She heard Matthew shout as she struggled to find footing, but the creek bed had dropped away beneath her. Matthew plunged in without hesitation. The rushing water pushed Victoria around a bend where a fallen tree created a dangerous strainer. She felt her skirts catching in the branches, pulling her under. Panic surged as water covered her face, but then strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her free with desperate strength. Together they tumbled onto the muddy bank, Victoria coughing and Matthew breathing heavily. The rain pelted them as he helped her to her feet. "Can you walk?" he shouted over the storm. She nodded, shivering violently as they stumbled toward the main house, closer than her cabin. Inside, Matthew immediately stoked the banked fire while Victoria stood dripping on the wooden floor. "You need dry clothes," he said, disappearing into his bedroom and returning with a shirt and trousers. "They'll be too large, but they're dry. You can change in there." He gestured to the bedroom. "I'll wait here." Victoria clutched the clothes, acutely aware of the impropriety, but having no practical alternative. "Thank you." In the privacy of his sparse bedroom, Victoria peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in the rough cotton shirt that smelled of soap and prairie wind. The trousers were hopeless, but the shirt hung to her knees, providing modest coverage. She used a blanket as a shawl before gathering her courage to emerge. Matthew had changed into dry clothing himself and now stood by the fire, his back to her. A pot of coffee bubbled on the stove. "The storm's settled in," he said without turning. "Might be best if you stay until it passes." Victoria moved closer to the fire's warmth. "What you said at the creek, about there never being anyone else. I need to understand what happened between us." Matthew finally faced her, his expression vulnerable in the firelight. "I wrote to you every month until I heard about your marriage. Never missed once. And I wrote weekly until your letters stopped coming." Victoria hugged the blanket tighter. "Someone interfered. My father never approved of you. He thought a soldier with no prospects wasn't good enough for his daughter. And later, a rough cowboy even less so." Victoria's voice softened. "He pushed Thomas Bennett's suit hard after we received word you'd gone west with a bride. News of my marriage would have been surprising to me." Matthew's attempt at humor fell flat. "Your father deliberately kept us apart." "It seems so." They stood in silence, the weight of years of misunderstanding heavy between them. The storm lashed against the windows, mirroring the turbulence within the small cabin. "What was he like?" Matthew finally asked. "Your husband?" Victoria looked into the flames. "Kind. Steady. A good man who deserved a wife who loved him completely. But you didn't." "I tried." Her eyes met his. "Thomas knew I'd loved someone before him. He never asked who. When he died, his last words were hoping I'd find happiness again." Tears welled unexpectedly. "I never told him about the letters I kept hidden." Matthew crossed the room slowly, stopping just short of touching her. "All these years, I thought you'd chosen someone else over me. And I thought the same of you." The crackling fire filled their silence. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. "I have something to show you," Matthew said suddenly, retrieving a wooden box from his trunk. He placed it on the table between them. "I kept them all." Victoria opened it with trembling fingers to find her letters, dozens of them, worn from repeated reading, carefully preserved. "I read them whenever the loneliness got too much," he admitted. "They reminded me that someone once believed I was more than just a cowboy." Victoria touched the pages gently. "You kept them even thinking I'd abandoned you? Some things you can't throw away, no matter how much they hurt." Matthew's voice roughened. "Victoria, there's something you should know. About why I never responded to your last letters, even if I had received them." She looked up, sensing his struggle. "I can't read," he confessed, the words clearly difficult. "Not well, anyway. Just enough to recognize my name and sign it." Victoria's surprise must have shown, because he continued hurriedly. "The letters I sent you during the war, I dictated them to my sergeant. He was educated, helped all us farm boys write home." Matthew's hands clenched. "I memorized your letters by having others read them to me, over and over until I knew every word. But your poetry quotes, the books in your trunk, memorized." The sergeant was patient, helped me learn passages that would impress an educated girl. His smile held no humor. Out here, no one expects a rancher to quote Shakespeare. No one knows. The revelation stunned Victoria. You've hidden this all these years? A man who can't read is considered simple-minded. I couldn't risk losing respect, especially starting my own spread. His eyes held hers. I can't read your letters, he said softly. But I feel every word when someone reads them to me. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Victoria thought of the books in his trunk, kept not for reading, but as connections to a different life. Who reads for you now? She asked. No one. I manage with markers and memory. It's why I was so determined to bring a teacher to the settlement, so others wouldn't face what I have. Victoria moved toward him, reaching for his hand. Matthew, I could teach you. I'm too old to learn properly. Nonsense. I've taught older students. His fingers tightened around hers. Why would you help me after everything? Because perhaps we've both been given a second chance to understand each other. The storm continued through the night, trapping them in the cabin's intimate confines. They talked until dawn, about the years apart, the paths taken, the grief and loneliness each had endured. When Victoria finally dozed in Matthew's chair, he covered her with a blanket and watched over her until morning light filtered through the windows. News of Victoria's rescue spread quickly through the small settlement, along with inevitable speculation about her night at Matthew's house. Though nothing improper had occurred, Victoria felt the weight of whispers following her at church the next Sunday. You should return to your cabin, Matthew suggested that evening. People talk. Let them, Victoria replied with unexpected firmness. I've spent too many years worrying about others' judgments. Nevertheless, she resumed her lodging in the small cabin, though their relationship had fundamentally changed. 3 evenings a week, Matthew arrived at her door with books in hand for reading lessons conducted by lamplight. His progress was slow but determined, his frustration evident yet controlled. You're a natural teacher, he told her one evening as they finished. Patient with stubborn students. You're hardly stubborn, just unpracticed. He smiled, something he did more frequently now. Careful. People might think you're sweet on me. Would that be so terrible? The question escaped before she could reconsider. Matthew's expression sobered. Victoria, you deserve better than a half-literate cowboy with calloused hands and nothing to offer but a struggling ranch. Is that how you see yourself? It's how others see me. How your father saw me. My father isn't here. Victoria closed the primer between them. And I'm no longer the naive girl who let others make decisions for her. August brought a heat wave that parched the valley and strained tempers. Victoria's school thrived despite the conditions, with 17 students now attending regularly. Matthew's ranch faced challenges as water sources dwindled and pasture turned brown. Their evening lessons continued, though Matthew often arrived exhausted from long days moving cattle to remaining grazing grounds. The situation worsened when Victoria discovered someone had broken into the schoolhouse, stealing the small cash box containing funds for supplies. The settlement had no sheriff, only a part-time deputy who rarely ventured from the saloon. Probably drifters, Matthew concluded after examining the forced door. Been more of them passing through lately, heading north. Victoria surveyed the damage with dismay. The children were saving for new readers. That evening, Matthew appeared at her cabin with a small leather pouch. It's not much, he said, placing it in her hands. But it should replace what was stolen. Victoria opened it to find several gold coins. Matthew, I can't accept this. It's not charity. It's an investment in the settlement's future. His eyes held hers, and in those children who deserve better than I had. Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached. Matthew tensed, hand moving to his holster as he stepped onto the porch. 3 riders approached, their expressions grim. Flynn, the leader called. Miller's boy never made it home from school. They've been searching since afternoon. Victoria appeared beside Matthew. Josiah? He left with the others at the usual time. Mrs. Miller thought he might have stopped here, another rider explained. Gather men, Matthew ordered. We'll start searching immediately. Victoria, stay here in case he wanders in. As the men rode off to organize search parties, Victoria paced the cabin, worry gnawing at her. Josiah was a quiet 9-year-old with poor vision but a quick mind. His family's homestead lay 4 miles east, a route that crossed Cripple Creek, swollen from recent mountain storms. Unable to wait passively, Victoria saddled her mare and rode toward the creek crossing. The summer twilight lingered, providing enough light to follow the main trail. When she reached the crossing, she found it partially washed out, the water running higher than usual. Hoofprints showed where search parties had already passed through. Victoria dismounted, studying the muddy banks. Something caught her eye downstream, a small object caught in branches overhanging the water. Drawing closer, she recognized Josiah's distinctive red-and-black knitted cap, made by his mother. Heart racing, Victoria followed the creek's edge, calling Josiah's name. A faint sound answered, not from the water, but from a ravine that ran alongside it. She scrambled down the steep embankment to find the boy huddled beneath an overhang, one leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. "Mrs. Bennett?" He squinted up at her. "I fell. My leg hurts something awful." Victoria knelt beside him. "We've been searching everywhere for you. I tried to take a shortcut home," he explained through chattering teeth. The bank gave way. Examination revealed a likely broken leg and mild shock. Victoria removed her shawl to wrap around the shivering boy, knowing she needed to signal the search parties. Her mare carried no gun for firing warning shots, and the ravine walls would muffle her shouts. "I need to start a fire," she told Josiah. "The smoke will bring help." Despite the summer drought making tinder plentiful, Victoria struggled to ignite it with the small matches from her pocket. When flames finally caught, she fed the fire carefully, producing a column of smoke visible in the dimming light. It took nearly an hour before they heard voices calling. Victoria shouted back until Matthew appeared at the ravine's edge, relief washing over his features. "Thank God," he breathed, then called to others. "Down here." She's found him. Getting Josiah up the steep slope proved challenging with his injury. Matthew fashioned a makeshift stretcher from his coat and branches, and together with two other ranchers, they carefully raised the boy to level ground. Victoria followed, accepting Matthew's hand as she climbed. "You shouldn't have gone searching alone," he admonished her, though his tone held more concern than anger. "I couldn't just wait," she replied, watching as the men secured Josiah to a horse for transport home. "Not when a child was missing." Matthew's expression softened. "You've got more courage than sense sometimes. I believe you've mentioned that before." "Probably." His hand remained wrapped around hers. "Victoria," the approach of other searchers interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Together they joined the procession escorting Josiah home. Their conversation postponed, but the connection between them undeniably strengthened. News of Victoria's rescue of Josiah transformed community perception overnight. Where before some had viewed her with the suspicion reserved for outsiders, now she received nods of respect and gifts of garden produce. Matthew watched this acceptance with quiet satisfaction, though Victoria noticed a growing restlessness in him during their lessons. "Something's troubling you," she observed one evening as they sat on her cabin porch, the primer open between them. Matthew stared toward the darkening mountains. "Rancher over in Deer Lodge had his cattle rustled last week. Signs point to the same gang that's been working south of here. You're worried they'll target your herd. I've doubled the night watches, but we're spread thin." He turned to her. "Victoria, I need to ask something of you." "Of course. If there's trouble, real trouble, promise you'll ride for help, not toward danger." The intensity in his eyes surprised her. "Matthew, promise me." After what happened with Josiah, he took her hand. "I can't bear the thought of you putting yourself at risk again." Victoria understood then what he couldn't quite say, that his feelings had grown beyond friendship, beyond their shared past. The realization that she felt the same settled over her with surprising clarity. "I promise to be careful," she offered instead. "But I won't promise to hide if those I care about are in danger." Their gazes held, the evening air heavy with unspoken feelings. Matthew's thumb traced circles on her palm, each movement sending warmth through her. "Victoria, I've been thinking." The sound of approaching riders interrupted them. Matthew stood quickly, positioning himself between Victoria and the approaching men. She recognized his foreman among the three riders. "Mr. Flynn," the foreman called. "Spotted strangers checking our north pasture. Armed, moving careful-like." Matthew's expression hardened. "How many?" "For that we saw." He turned to Victoria. "Stay inside. Lock the doors." Before she could protest, Matthew mounted and rode away with his men, leaving her standing alone on the darkened porch. Victoria watched until they disappeared, then reluctantly went inside, securing the cabin as instructed. The night passed slowly, each sound causing her to start. Victoria kept a loaded shotgun nearby, a precaution Matthew had insisted upon when she first arrived. As dawn approached without his return, worry gnawed at her composure. When hoofbeats finally approached mid-morning, Victoria rushed outside to find Matthew dismounting slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. A bloodstained bandage wrapped his upper arm. "What happened?" she demanded, hurrying to his side. "Rustlers. We caught them cutting the fence." His voice was tight with pain. "There was shooting." Victoria helped him inside, concern overriding propriety. "You're injured." "Bullet grazed me. Others got worse." He sank into a chair, allowing her to examine the crude field dressing. "Two of the gang won't be troubling anyone again. Sheriff's deputy has the others." As Victoria cleaned and re-bandaged his wound, Matthew watched her with intensity. "You have steady hands." "I've had practice. During the war, I volunteered at the hospital." She tied off the bandage. "This needs proper stitching. It'll heal." Victoria's hands lingered on his arm. "You could have been killed. Occupational hazard." His attempt at lightness failed as he winced. "Don't joke about such things," she said sharply. "Not when—" She stopped herself. "When what, Victoria?" Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. "Not when I've only just found you again." Matthew's uninjured arm rose slowly, his hand cupping her cheek. "I've been fighting this, telling myself you deserve better." "Better than what?" Victoria challenged. "Than a man who builds schools for children he doesn't have, who risks his life protecting others, who works harder than anyone I've known to overcome his difficulties. A man who still struggles to read simple words, who can offer nothing but a hard life in an unforgiving land." Victoria covered his hand with hers. "I've had comfort without happiness. I've had security without passion. I don't fear a hard life, Matthew. I fear an empty one." The confession hung between them. Matthew leaned forward, hesitating just before his lips met hers. "Are you certain?" Victoria answered by closing the distance herself, her kiss giving him the assurance words couldn't convey. Their courtship progressed with cautious joy through September's golden days. Matthew's wound healed as harvest season brought the community together for shared labor. Victoria continued teaching while helping with evening ranch work, discovering unexpected pleasure in the rhythm of frontier life. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Some community members expressed concern about proprieties, while others, particularly those who remembered their own frontier courtships, showed understanding. Matthew addressed the situation by proposing that Victoria move into the main house, while he temporarily relocated to the bunkhouse, an arrangement that protected her reputation while allowing their relationship to deepen. One crisp evening, as autumn painted the cottonwoods yellow, Matthew invited Victoria for a ride to his favorite viewpoint overlooking the valley. They reached the promontory as sunset gilded the landscape, transforming ordinary fields and distant mountains into something magnificent. "I came here the day I bought this land," Matthew told her as they dismounted. "Stood right here and wondered if I was a fool to think I could build something lasting in such a wild place." Victoria took in the sprawling view, Matthew's ranch below, the settlement beyond, the vast untamed wilderness surrounding them. "And now I know the answer depends on who shares the building." He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Victoria, I'm not an educated man. I don't have pretty words or poetry to offer. But I love you, have loved you since we were hardly more than children." Victoria's heart swelled as she recognized the moment for what it was. "I can't promise an easy life," Matthew continued, "but I can promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you, learning alongside you, building something that matters together." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's. I've carried it since leaving Missouri, never thinking I'd have reason to offer it to anyone." His eyes met hers, vulnerability and hope mingled. "Victoria Taylor, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as Victoria looked at the man before her, so different from the boy she'd once known, yet carrying the same heart that had written of dreams and quoted poetry he couldn't read. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." Matthew slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. When he kissed her, the last light of day surrounding them, Victoria felt the pieces of her broken heart finally mending, not into what it had been before, but into something stronger, tempered by loss and newfound joy. They married in October, A simple ceremony in the newly completed church with the entire settlement attending. Victoria wore a dress of deep blue silk, her one concession to Eastern refinement, with wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair. Matthew, clean-shaven and solemn in his best clothes, spoke his vows clearly, the words memorized through determined practice during their evening lessons. "I may stumble over written words," he told her afterward as they greeted well-wishers, "but I meant every one I spoke today." Their wedding celebration continued into evening. The community's gift to the schoolteacher who had become one of their own and the rancher who had helped build their settlement. As fiddle music filled the churchyard, Victoria found herself surrounded by the children she taught, their excited chatter about the wedding cake and decorations bringing laughter to her lips. "You've given them more than reading and figures," Margaret Holden observed, joining her. "You've shown them beauty has a place even out here." Victoria watched as Matthew helped Josiah Miller, his leg still splinted but healing well, try a cautious dance step. "The beauty was always here," she replied. "Sometimes we just need help seeing it." Later, as they rode back to what was now their shared home, Matthew confessed, "I've been practicing something special for today." At the ranch, he led Victoria inside to where a letter lay on the table, handwritten in the careful, imperfect script she recognized from their lessons. "I wrote it myself," he said quietly. "Took weeks." Victoria opened it with reverent hands, reading slowly. "My dearest Victoria, I cannot offer poetry like better men might. But today I promise to love you with everything I am and everything I may become. You found me when I was lost, taught me when I thought I could not learn, and loved me when I believed myself unworthy. I may never read easily, but I will always feel every word you write, every touch you give, every look we share. This hard land becomes home because you are here. Your husband." Matthew tears flowed freely as Victoria embraced him. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Every word." "I had help with the spelling," he admitted with a smile against her hair. "But the feelings are all mine." "As are mine for you," Victoria replied, drawing back to look into his eyes. "I spent years believing I'd never find happiness again. Now I know it was waiting here all along." In the year that followed, the Flynn Ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Victoria continued teaching while helping Matthew implement improvements she'd learned from agricultural journals she read aloud during winter evenings. Their reading lessons evolved into a shared ritual, Matthew's progress slow but steady, his determination unwavering. The following spring, as wildflowers again carpeted the valley, Victoria shared news that completed their joy. They would welcome a child when autumn returned. Matthew's reaction, speechless wonder followed by gentle protectiveness, confirmed what Victoria had long known. The lonely cowboy who once believed love had no place on the frontier had transformed into a man who built his life around it. On a perfect June evening, they sat together on their porch watching twilight settle over the land that had tested and ultimately blessed them. Matthew's arm encircled Victoria's waist, his hand resting protectively over the slight curve of her belly. "I found something yesterday," he said, "when I was fixing that broken shelf." From his pocket, he withdrew a faded envelope, one of Victoria's letters that had slipped behind the wooden trunk years ago. "Would you read it to me?" he asked softly. Victoria opened it carefully, smoothing the yellowed paper. "It's dated April 1866. My last letter before we lost each other," Matthew finished. "Please." In the gathering dusk, Victoria read words written by a hopeful young woman to a man she feared was slipping away, words of love, determination, and belief in their shared future. When she finished, Matthew took the letter gently. "All these years," he said, tracing the handwriting with calloused fingers, "these words were waiting, just like we were." Victoria leaned against his shoulder. "Some things are meant to find their way home. Like school teachers who follow newspaper advertisements to Montana territory." A smile warmed his voice. "Like cowboys who keep poetry books they cannot read, but feel every word." As night embraced the valley, they remained together on the porch of the home they'd built. Not just the physical structure, but the life they'd created from misunderstanding and separation. Their story, like the frontier itself, had demanded courage, perseverance, and faith that something beautiful could grow in even the harshest circumstances. And it had.